Hey there, everyone. Today's video, just wanted to give you a little heads up before you start it, is a little bit longer than I have been making. It's a little over 35 minutes long. I did that because there are several things I needed to talk about with World War I that were very important to know about. So I hope you enjoy the video. Have a good day. I hope you all are doing well today. I'm excited about this video. What I'm going to discuss today is mostly things dealing with the year of 1915, the second year of the war that is going on taking place here. We have discussed the French resistance, the German Schlieffen Plan falling apart, the development of trench warfare, and as I mentioned, this video is going to have some of the psychological effects that the war is taking place in both the German and Allied camps. Their military is going on there, as well as some of the civilian reactions to different things that happen. Now, obviously, there are many, many things that I could discuss in the year 1915 and things that took place here. There is no way that I can cover all of 1915 in a short video like this. There have been thousands, possibly millions of pages written about this war and about this year as well. And I'm just not going to be able to cover it all as much as it deserves, as much as I would like. There's also not just the parts that I cover, dealing mainly with Europe and the Western Front. There are parts around the world that are getting very little recognition that I just unfortunately will not have time to cover. But as we go through here, there are four things I do want to discuss. And some of those are military campaigns, others are political and propaganda situations, and one of them was a accident, or it wasn't an accident, it was a major surprise at how useful it would be. And so let's go ahead and get started. The first one I want to talk about is the Allies' attempt to pull attention away from the German Western Front. Now, again, when I say the Western Front, I mean that if you're looking at Germany, they're in the middle of Europe there. They are fighting on two different fronts, two different sides where the battle is taking place. The Eastern Front, that is dealing with the Russian and the German battle lines that are there. That one is very fluid. It moves back and forth quite often. And not a lot of trenches built on that side, but enough. The Western Front is where we look at it and say that the British and the French, and eventually the Americans, are fighting the Germans on the Germans' Western Front. Now, it's France's Eastern Front, but we call it the Western Front. And so we're looking at it there. And the Germans had just been pounding and pounding and pounding the Allied powers there because Germany was ready for this. They were ready to go. They had the men, the material, the weapons to do this. And they were being pretty successful where they could. And so the Allies had to do something to pull the attention of the German military away from the Western Front, kind of ease up, pull some troops away from there, and go somewhere else. Well, they had an idea. One of the main allies of the Germans were the Austro-Hungarians, but also the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had been around for a very long time at this point. They had been there, they had been controlling the different territories in what we consider the Middle East and Turkey and most of Northern Africa and these areas there, and had a lot of influence in that territory. Well, one of the things that made the Allies nervous was not only the fact that the Ottoman Empire had a major territorial impression on the Mediterranean Sea, but also they were right next to Egypt. At this point, Egypt was basically controlled by the Allies. England and France, depending on how you look at it there, England mostly was really nervous that the Ottomans would invade Egypt, and that would be bad for two reasons. One reason was because massive amount of food supplies came from Egypt and were supporting the war effort for the Allied powers, and if they lost that, that would be a major blow. The other problem was that Egypt had the Suez Canal, which is a canal from the Red Sea, that man-made canal, man-made waterway that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, which then connects to the Indian Ocean. And if that was taken over by the Axis powers, by the Ottoman Empire, that means that no traffic, no water traffic, shipping could go through that area. So if the Allies wanted to move troops or supplies or anything by ship from the European front and that area there and get to India, which was also controlled by England at the time, they had to sail, instead of a very, very short journey from the Mediterranean Sea down the Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean, they had to sail all the way around the continent of Africa. And so England could not lose Egypt. They couldn't do it. So attacking the Ottoman Empire would help them in two ways. One, it would pull troops from the German offensive and different things there, kind of pull the attention away from that, but it would also pull the attention away from Egypt, where the Ottoman Empire would not be able to afford to send troops down to the southern portion there and into Egypt. So they wanted to go through and cut the Axis powers in half. The capital, well, the main city that they wanted was the city of Istanbul, often called Constantinople until the Ottoman Empire took it over. It was always called Constantinople until the Ottoman Empire took it over. And so Istanbul was there, also called Byzantium was there, and we've talked about where that is, and that is right along. You have the Black Sea here, and then you have a short strait. There's a little spot with Constantinople, and then opens up into another waterway, and there's a very short area of water that separates the Asian continent and the European continent. And that short strip of water is called the Dardanelles. Now, it is less than 5 miles wide. Now, it is probably close to 10, 15 miles long, but less than 5 miles wide. And that area there is one of the most important areas if you are wanting to go and conquer this territory. Split them in half, split the Axis powers, the Ottoman Empire stuck in Asia, and the Austro-Hungarian and German groups stuck in Europe. And so the British want to go through there. They had to do this. Now, the Dardanelles Straits, or just the Dardanelles, the Axis powers realized how important this was. And so they go through there, and if you look it up, go ahead and pull up another tab or something while I'm talking here, and look up the Dardanelles. All right, to look up the Dardanelles, there's Dardanelles. But look up the Dardanelles, and you will see it's a very small strip of water that goes through there. Well, within this strip, again, the Ottomans were not fools. They were not ignorant in the ways of warfare. What they needed to do, and they knew this, was make sure that no Allied ships were going to be able to make it through this strait here. So they laid it with mines. Now, if you ever played Minesweeper, the game on the computer where you go through and you click, and it has the little numbers on it, and has you can put a flag or a question mark, or if you click the mine, then it all blows up and you lose the game. Well, that's what it's talking about here. These mines were sunk and then held by a chain and were floating in the water, or they just floated on the surface of the water. Many times they were magnetic, and when a ship would come by, the magnets in the mines would go and attach to the ship. Well, when it rammed the ship, that would go and hit a primer and then explode. And that was very, very detrimental, obviously. You could lose a millions of dollars ship with a single mine that cost maybe $100. Sink an entire battleship. And these battle cruisers that the British had were incredibly expensive. And the British did not want to lose them. So what started out as the plan was there was a very relatively small plan where they would go with the British would take their ships, they would go clear the Dardanelles, bombard a bunch of the Ottoman Empire's forts, and then take this area there. Well, the problem was when the plan was being made, Churchill, Winston Churchill, who was not the prime minister at this time, he's a officer, he's a not an officer, he's a person within the Navy of the British Empire, wants to do something. And before this, 10, 15, 20 years before this, the British had this massive fleet of battleships, of naval warfare weaponry that during their time were awesome, beautiful, wonderful ships. But the problem was these ships were incredibly outdated. Only 20 years old, but they were too old to be used successfully. So the British had all of these ships that they really couldn't do anything with. So Winston Churchill says, here's my idea. What we'll do is we'll take these older ships, we'll put basically what's called a skeleton crew, meaning very small crew on them. We'll send those through the Dardanelles, let them get shot by the forts that are there, let them get hit by the mines. It'll clear that area out. Then we can send in our newer, better ships that'll go through and just dominate the field. Well, two problems arose. One was that the captains of these ships that were kind of out of date had attachments. They were emotionally attached to these ships. It was their ship. And they didn't want their ship used as some kind of suicide bombardment to go and purposely blow your ship up on the enemy mines. Who would want to do that with their ship? And so the captains didn't like that. The other thing was some of the different admirals or the commanders, the fleets of the Navy, looked at it and says, there's no way that'll work. We have to send troops ashore to take out the forts as well. And so what started out as a basic, again, relatively small expedition to go through and conquer the straits turned into this major military campaign, both amphibious, meaning dropping troops off from the water onto the land, and also with these ships that would go through with this bombardment. Well, you can look up the specific numbers, but the British go through and they're able to go and bombard several of the coastal forts that are close to the ocean and close to the Mediterranean Sea there. And the mine-sweeping ships were able to get about 6 miles up into the Dardanelles, but then the other forts that the Ottoman Empire had were able to reach the British ships, but the ships could not reach the forts. So that was a big problem, major problem there, major deal that they had to go with there. So that means that the ships had to pull back. Well, eventually, Winston Churchill gets a hold of them and says, "What's taking so long? Send the ships up the Dardanelles. We know they're going to get lost." So they go up there, and in a relatively short time, boom! One of those glorious, beautiful ships that had been so expensive to begin with gets hit by a mine and starts sinking. And then another boom gets hit by a mine and starts sinking. Another boom starts by a mine and starts sinking. Most of the men on those ships were rescued. About 700 men did lose their lives in this expedition. But the problem was, is the men, as the ships were going up the Dardanelles and boom, 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 these ships are blowing up, the other captains got scared and got nervous. And I believe rightfully so. They didn't want their ships or their men to face what they just seen, so they all retreat. The ships pull back. But the problem was, that's what those ships were there for. They had their ships there to go and clear the mines. So what took place next was that the British and the French landed troops to go and try to take these forts. But after fighting for weeks on end, and this was a brutal, bloody, graphically hard situation that went through here, the French and the British, the Allies, have over 300,000 casualties, 300,000 men that they lose that are no longer battle available. Again, casualty does not necessarily mean that they died, it just means that they're not able to fight in battle for a time period. Whereas the Ottoman Empire, they lost 250,000. They had 250,000 casualties. So the British, as the attacking force, which generally happens, they lost more. But this is a major, major problem for them. Because depending on what historian you look at, nobody really says that either side won. Most of them look at it and say it was a stalemate, maybe it was a little bit of a victory, or it's set up for a good victory in the future. But for losing a total or almost 600,000 casualties combined from both sides, it was a stalemate. This did not go, and they did not get did not get Istanbul. They did not take the Dardanelles in this battle. It did help to pull some attention away from the Western Front, which I guess that was successful, and it did help to distract the Ottoman Empire away from the portions of Egypt, which again was successful. But as a military campaign to take the Dardanelles and then Istanbul was not successful. So that's the first thing I want to talk about there. The first major, well, it's not the first major event, but the one thing I want to talk about in 1915. The next thing was something called submarine warfare. Now, this is something that a lot of people find fascinating. Submarines are pretty cool. As most of you know, the sub, meaning under or below, marine, meaning water or the life there, the submarines go under the water. Well, the Germans, they didn't call them submarines quite yet. They called them U-boats. Um, and so the German U-boats, they looked at this, and that's the best thing that the Germans had at this point. The Germans actually had a beautiful, glorious fleet, but there was a problem. Right near the beginning of the war, Germany had been blockaded by the British, meaning that the ports and the areas that the German fleets were held and were being taken care of, just outside of the range of the guns, the British had set their own ships up to keep those ships of the Germans from being able to leave port. So the surface ships were stuck in port. They couldn't go anywhere. And there was one time that they tried to go out and have a battle, and it wasn't very successful. It was, again, another stalemate kind of thing. And so they retreated back into port and stayed there for most of the year, most of the war. But the Germans had these submarines, had these U-boats that could slide underneath of these surface ships. And most of the time, what the surface ships would, they would just be cruising along and they would get smashed with the torpedo. And the Germans had a problem. They knew that if they allowed their enemies, specifically England, to continue to get reinforcements of supplies, of troops, of money, of food, of material, of anything from their allies brought to the island of the United Kingdom, the Isles of the United Kingdom, then Germany was going to lose. There's no way they could do that. And so Germany, doing what they believed was their only option, which truly it was, is you're in warfare, it's really one of your only options here. The Germans go and send out a letter. Actually, let the Allied powers know. They say, listen up, here's what's going to happen. If you continue to send troops and material and supplies and food to England, we will sink your ships. If they are merchant ships and you are flying a flag of one of allies of England, you will be sunk. It's called unrestricted submarine warfare. Anybody within the territory of the British Isles, we will sink your ships. Well, people knew about this. It had been released to the governments. It had been released to the press of the different nations, and they knew about this. But people continued to send ships that way. Well, one of the largest ships of that time, it was a massive ship by the day standards for shipping and different things there, was called the Lusitania. Now, the Lusitania was, like I said, a glorious, grand ship there. And there was a problem, though, that with this Lusitania that was going through. When the British were going through, and not just the British, but their allies were going through and taking different things there, they got to the point where they realized we need to stop this trade from going back and forth. We need to stop it. And so the Lusitania that came through here would be targeted by the uh, British, or sorry, by the Germans. So it leaves New York in May of 1915, and it is wanting to travel to Liverpool, port in Ireland. And so they're wanting to go through there and have the port there to take place. And so they're going. Well, the one German U-boat comes up, and they couldn't stay underwater for a long, long, long time. So they had to come up and kind of refresh the air, recharge batteries, things like that. Well, they see the Lusitania on the horizon, and they go and they dive, they send a torpedo, and they sink the Lusitania. Within 15 minutes, it sinks to the bottom. Now, a lot of things happened because of this. One of the things that had happened the most was they saw that almost 1,200 people, over 1,200 people died. 1,260 people died from this, is what the news reports were going out. And honestly, sinking the Lusitania itself was not a major blow to any of the powers. It wasn't a major victory to the Germans for sinking this one ship. It was not a major blow to the British for not getting these people here. It was not a major blow to the Americans who had put things on the ship. What did happen, though, and again, when I say major blow, I mean strategic military blow. The problem was that when the Lusitania fell, the different powers that were there used it as propaganda. Now, propaganda means that it's something that a power will use, whether it is a wartime power, a government, a school, anybody can use propaganda. And propaganda is there to support their cause, whatever it may be. If you go to another team, another school, and during sports, and they have banners up on their walls, our team is the best, or, go, win, fight, those kind of things. That's propaganda. Well, the Germans used it as propaganda, saying they're defending themselves, saying, listen, it would be insane for us to allow Germans, or to allow England and France to get these supplies. We're at war for them. Stop sending them supplies. But the Allied powers looked at it a different way. They said, you just sank a civilian ship. And they actually said during the war, the Allied powers say that civilian ship was both unarmed and was not carrying any munitions, no ammo, no weapons, nothing. You attacked and killed that ship, you are a mass murderer, killed all those people that were there. And so Ireland, where the Lusitania was going to, remember, it was going to Liverpool, the port city in Ireland. They actually used as a rallying cry, like, remember the Lusitania or avenge the Lusitania. The Americans would later use it as as justification there because there were Americans on board the ship when it died, when it went down, when it sank. And so that was a big problem there. And so for decades, American and British intelligence military intelligence said that there was nothing on the Lusitania. They were not shipping us things there. But interestingly, in 1982, okay, remember the war ended in 1918. In 1982, not that long ago, all of your parents would have been alive during this time. There were some scavengers, some salvagers, they were called, that wanted to try to find the ship of the Lusitania and see if they could bring it back up, see if they could salvage it and save it. Well, when that happened, Whitehall freaked out. Now, for those who do not know, Whitehall is basically saying like Washington of England, like the English government freaked out because they had been lying for many, many years. The American and the English intelligence have been saying, even during the war, during World War One, there was nothing on Lusitania. You people are murderers. But when the salvagers wanted to go find the ship, the government of England realized, there actually were munitions on there. There actually were bombs and ammo and some pretty hefty stuff we were getting delivered from the United States. We need to tell these salvagers so that they know, so that they don't get hurt, so that they don't get damaged by this stuff. And so the government of England came out in 1982 and said, yes, there were munitions on there. There were weapons on there. You guys, when you're going down there, you need to be very careful so you do not hurt themselves. So they go through and they're able to find the ship there, and it's a fascinating story. You can look it up if you'd like. So we talked about the Dardanelles campaign, which was basically a major military stalemate for both sides, strategically speaking. We talked about the Lusitania and the submarine U-boat warfare that they had and bombing the different things there. And it would actually really go against and hurt the Germans, this unrestricted submarine warfare. Yes, they were sinking thousands of tons of material and supply being sent to Britain, but they're also hurting their public image with the world. And when public opinion starts turning against you, unless you are very, very, very powerful and don't really care what the rest of the world thinks about you, then you're stuck. The third thing I want to talk about are Zeppelins. Now, Zeppelins, if you don't know what that is, they are those large, often gray airships that look like giant oblong balloons, a giant oval balloon. They're gray, and they have parts down at the bottom where, like cabins, where people would be able to sit and have they're portrayed in movies. If you ever heard of the Hindenburg, that was a Zeppelin. And these airships that would go through, and they were called airships because, I mean, they were the size of ships, but in the air, airships. And when these would go through there, the way that they were able to get into the air was not like a hot air balloon. Hot air balloon is the canvas balloon there with the basket on the bottom. It has a little fire generator, the little furnace there that creates the hot air that makes the balloon go up. Zeppelins are way too big for that. So what they would do inside that giant air pocket would use an element that was actually lighter than air. It's called hydrogen. And they would pump that huge area up there with hydrogen and it would raise it up. And the reason it was so stinking big is because that's how much hydrogen you needed to lift that airship into the air. There was a major problem though. Hydrogen was incredibly flammable. And so if they were not careful, the ship would explode if something bad happened. For instance, the Hindenburg, when that took place there. Now, Zeppelins have been used for a while for transportation. They would be used after the war for transportation. But the Germans started using the Zeppelins for warfare. They were able to go higher than most of the planes that were available at the time. They were very steady. They could carry over 4,000 pounds of bombs that they just, literally push out a window and drop on whatever city they're above there. And again, military strategics, different things like that, they were relatively limited for World War One with the German Zeppelin air fleet. Relatively small. But the psychological effect that they had was massive. Now, psychological is basically where you mess with the mind of your opponent. Is where you're looking at saying, okay, I may not be able to beat you physically with this, but what I am doing is scaring you so much that it makes you less effective in this fight, in this battle. And the reason it was so successful psychologically is because the Germans were actually able to send these Zeppelins, these airships, out of Germany, over the English Channel, across England, and drop bombs on the capital. On the capital. Drop bombs on London itself, the capital of England. And that's a big deal. Because these people, I mean, they've always felt safe and secure on the island of the United Kingdom. We're on an island. They can't get to us. We have the best navy in the world. There's nothing going to happen. We are relatively safe here in London. Well, then they wake up in the night and there's bombs being dropped around them. It shows that they are not safe even in the capital. So psychologically, just massive, jarring situations are happening here to the British people. And it's very successful in that way. But the problem was they were slow, they were full of hydrogen, and sometimes the British planes that would go there, there's reports of actually the planes would go fly above the Zeppelins where they could, drop a bomb on the top of it, and then try to light it on fire that way. Very going through there. So they're pretty vulnerable also to weather. If the wind was blowing really, really hard, the Zeppelins couldn't combat that. And so psychologically able to bomb and able to really mess with the minds of the people there at home in London, but overall not militarily effective. The final thing I want to talk about today was a battle that, like I said, started out as an experiment, was way more successful than they expected it to be, and almost accidentally was an early victory for the Germans. And that is the Battle of Ypres. The Battle of Ypres started off with a German scientist, a chemist, years before this, that offered his idea to the German military. He had come up with a way to develop something called chlorine gas. Now, chlorine is, same kind of stuff that we use to filter the pools, and chlorine that is in bleach. That is why you should never mix chemicals, especially bleach, because the gas and the noxious fumes that it gives off can be very, very dangerous, even deadly that are there. So never mix chemicals that have there. But the Germans were able to figure this out. And this one German scientist comes and says, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we use this stuff, this chlorine gas that I've developed? And the German military look at it and they're trying to figure out, and they start mass producing it. Well, like, how can we use this? What can we do? Well, they pick an area of the line where trenches had been dug, lines had been drawn, no man's land was shelled constantly, and they said, let's pick here. And so over several weeks, even a couple of months, the German military were transporting canisters, basically giant drums, metal drums of this gas, and putting it along the line of the German trenches at Ypres. And a time was set. There was a uh, signal given. They knew the exact time. Their watches were synchronized. And when that time came, all of these canisters were opened. Now, when I say chlorine gas, if you know anything about World War One, you know what's coming. But if you don't know anything about World War One, and that's totally fine, what is about to happen is something that would change warfare for the rest of history. Actually, it would become so bad and so difficult with what was being started here that after the war, using gas attacks like this would become illegal in the laws of war. There are countries in recent history, in the last 15, 20 years, that have used gas attacks on their own people, and the entire community in the world community has just completely turned against these people. these regimes for using these gas attacks here. Well, the signal is given. The canisters are opened. The Allied forces are in their trenches at Ypres, and they're watching across no man's land, being careful to see what's going on there. All of a sudden, from the distance, they see a yellowish-green cloud flowing across no man's land. The Allied officers believe it is a smokescreen to hide a German offensive, a German attack. And so they blow their whistles, they sound the alarm, they let their troops know they need to get up, they need to get to the trench wall, and they need to be prepared to hold back this attack. Well, as this yellow-greenish cloud gets closer to the trench line, the men who survived this gas attack report later that they begin to smell something that seemed to be a mixture of a sweet smell of pineapple, but the pungent smell of pepper. And then they begin to cough. The chlorine gas, as that wave began to flow over the trenches, it began to hit the soldiers. And they got it in their eyes, in their mouths, their nose, their lungs, and they begin to cough and cough. And what chlorine gas does to a human body, specifically the lungs, is it destroys the lungs' ability to absorb oxygen. It goes in there and kind of picture it shreds your lungs. It could take days for you to die from this. You would asphyxiate. You would actually suffocate because your lungs are not capable of absorbing the oxygen from the air that you breathe in. And so these men have no idea what this is. These Allied troops at Ypres have no idea what's happening. And so they get hit with this cloud and it's burning. Many of them are vomiting. Their eyes and nose are bleeding. Their lungs are burning. They can't breathe. And they just panic. Across this whole line, 4 miles wide, a gap opens up on the Allied side, where for 4 miles, from one side to the other, 4 miles at Ypres, the Allied troops just freak out. They leave their gun placements. 50 machine guns were abandoned at this point. Their rifles are just thrown away, and they run away from the front and run away from this gas cloud as fast as they possibly can. Well, as I mentioned, this was a small scale attack. The Germans were just kind of, let's see what happens with this gas. And there was a small experiment. Well, what became as a small experiment was a huge success. The problem was the Germans weren't ready for it. They didn't think it was going to be as successful as it was. And so they're just standing there. They're like, well, now what? We don't have the troops to punch through and capitalize on this line. But not only that, the German troops that are standing there, they know what chlorine gas will do to you. They've heard the reports. They know what this is. They can smell the gas. They get it. And they were afraid that if they marched through where this gas cloud had just been, they would be affected by the gas as well. And so it was not very successful of an attack, of an invasion, of a momentum there for the Germans, even though the gas itself was incredibly successful beyond their wildest dreams that they have there. And because of the Germans slowing down and being hesitant to invade because of the gas that was still there, the Allies were able to shore up that line and make sure that it didn't fall apart there. And so within 1 hour, all of this happens there. Now, the problem would come that the gas, the way that the Germans used it, by opening canisters up and then it being sent forward and what they were doing there, that was very much reliant on the weather. If it was windy, you had to make sure the wind was blowing towards the enemy. The first time that the Allied powers do a major gas attack against the Germans, the wind actually blows the wrong way. And instead of the Allies being here, they open up the gas tanks and the canisters and going this way, the wind turned it and blew it over top of them. Well, this begins to develop to realize that both sides need gas masks. And the first initial gas masks that were given out were basically these things that had cotton inside of them that the troops would wrap around their faces and their nose and their mouths. But just simply cotton wouldn't stop the gas from damaging them and killing them. And so they had to put ammonia inside the cotton. Well, most of the time on the front lines in battle, you don't have, bottles of ammonia sitting around. maybe if you went down to a local Walmart or CVS or some pharmacy like that, you can get some ammonia for something. I don't know. Maybe you could, maybe you can't. But these troops couldn't do that. The only reliable source of ammonia that they had was their own urine. The men would urinate on the cotton, and then they would be put inside those masks, those canisters that they have there, and then that would be put over their face. And we look at that, and today we say that is incredibly gross, which it really is. That's not hygienic. Like that's really kind of nasty to think that you would urinate in that and then put it up to your mouth to help do that. But the alternative was standing there and saying, "Ew, no, that's gross. I'm not going to do that." And then your lungs being full of chlorine gas and you suffocating to death for the next 2.5 days. Eventually, they would have better gas masks that wouldn't require that, but that's what happened. That's what would develop there, and that's what would take place. So that brings us to the end of this video here. Again, looking at the different situations there. We will, next video, begin to talk about 1916 and see which side is getting the upper hand. Are the soldiers learning anything over the past 2 years? Are the officers that lead, are the generals and the commanders of the military, are they learning anything and changing to see who will be the victor of this war? Have a good day. As I mentioned at the beginning, this video is a little bit longer. I don't apologize for that. This stuff was important, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. To help it make it a little bit easier, the fact that this one was longer, there's going to be no homework this evening. Have a great evening.